The night was unusually quiet in the rolling hills of southern Germany. The war had dragged on for years, leaving towns and villages scarred by conflict, rationing, and fear. Families whispered in their kitchens, windows were shuttered early, and the countryside was marked by the constant tension of soldiers passing through, the distant hum of engines, and the occasional flash of gunfire on the horizon. It was a place where everyone knew that suspicion could be as deadly as a bullet. And yet, amid this war-torn landscape, a story unfolded that defied the expected cruelty of those times. A story of courage, humanity, and a secret that would have been punishable by death. High above, a massive American B-29 bomber, its frame gleaming under the moonlight, had been flying on a mission over Europe. Its crew, exhausted and tense, had been tracking their course when disaster struck. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from below, a sudden burst that tore through one of the engines. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and the plane shuddered violently. The pilot fought to keep control, but the aircraft was mortally wounded. Down below, the villagers had heard the distant roar and the terrifying, mechanical groan of something massive breaking apart in the sky. Then came the impact, a thunderous crash in a secluded forest clearing, shaking the earth and startling the local wildlife. Smoke curled into the night sky, a grey, ominous marker of destruction, yet strangely, from the wreckage, a few figures emerged, shaken but alive. For anyone witnessing this from the nearby village, the danger was immediate. The area was under strict Nazi surveillance, and any American airmen spotted on German soil would be hunted mercilessly. Yet, despite the risks, something remarkable began to happen. Families from the surrounding farms and homes made a choice that few could have imagined. They decided to help, not out of sympathy for the enemy, necessarily, but because, in that moment, humanity outweighed ideology. People who had lived in fear, who had been subjected to relentless propaganda for years, understood that lives were at stake, and they could not turn their backs. The villagers acted quietly, communicating in whispers, through gestures and coded signals. One family, the Schneiders, led the effort. Their farmhouse, a modest structure nestled at the edge of the forest, became a hub of clandestine activity. They guided the airmen into hidden cellars, concealed by stacks of firewood and hay. Neighbors contributed, as well, baskets of food, blankets, and simple clothing that could help the Americans blend in. All the while, the risk of discovery was immense. A single patrol passing by, a careless word, or the crack of a twig underfoot could have led to execution, or worse, for the civilians and the soldiers alike. But fear, in this case, was tempered by resolve. They worked in silence, learning the airmen's names, their stories, even fragments of their hometowns, back in America. Each night, as the villagers moved quietly along hidden paths to bring food and water, they witnessed the exhaustion etched into the faces of men who had risked everything and now depended entirely on strangers. And yet, for all the danger, there was also a strange beauty in the way humanity persisted amid the horrors of war. Even as bombs fell thousands of miles away and the machinery of conflict raged on, here, in a quiet forest in Germany, compassion endured. Communication with the outside world was impossible. There were no radios that could safely transmit messages, no friendly soldiers to call for help. The villagers improvised. They dug concealed trenches for escape routes, arranged hidden caches in barns, and devised signals that allowed the airmen to move without detection. Each day brought new challenges: a sudden patrol, the need for additional supplies, and the constant fear of betrayal. Yet, despite the ever-present danger, the bond between the villagers and the crew deepened. A shared understanding emerged that sometimes survival depends not just on skill or luck, but on the courage of those willing to defy expectation. And then, as dawn broke over the forest, painting the leaves with soft gold light, a thought lingered in the minds of all involved. How long could this last? How many days before discovery changed everything? Every shadow could be a threat, every sound a warning. Yet, amid the tension, the villagers held on to a fragile hope. Hope that the Americans could be kept safe, that they could be returned to their own lines, that the simple act of doing what was right might yet survive in a world consumed by war. Little did anyone know, the story that began that night would ripple far beyond the forest. a testament to courage in the quietest moments. This was not about battlefields or strategic victories, but about something more enduring: humanity in its purest form. And for the men of the B-29 and the villagers who hid them, the weeks that followed would test their resourcefulness, their nerve, and their ability to trust in each other completely. The forest remained their sanctuary, a green, tangled fortress that concealed the men from the eyes of soldiers who would have shown them no mercy. For the villagers, every day was a delicate balancing act. They had to move quietly, with no trace of their presence, delivering food, water, and news, while the crew of the B-29 learned to trust that the people helping them were not just sympathetic strangers, but lifelines. Each of the airmen had their own fears and doubts. They had seen the war at its worst, the destruction, the loss, the cruelty, and yet here they were, relying on civilians in the heart of enemy territory. Every night, as they huddled in a hidden cellar beneath the Schneider's barn, they could hear the distant rumble of patrols, the sharp bark of German shepherds, and the wind whistling through the trees. One wrong move, one careless sound, could cost lives, but the ingenuity of the villagers was extraordinary. Paths were disguised with fallen branches, small pits were dug to break footprints, and false trails were laid to mislead anyone following. They used the natural contours of the land to their advantage, guiding the airmen along narrow ridges, through thickets, and across streams that masked their movements. Food was delivered in secret, hidden beneath hay in wagons or tucked into baskets that looked like everyday chores. The villagers learned to speak in gestures and short phrases that held double meanings, so even casual conversation could carry warnings or instructions. They were orchestrating a ballet of secrecy, where timing and silence were as vital as courage itself. The airmen, once tense and uncertain, began to adapt. They learned to move quietly, to trust the signals, and to read the subtle cues from their helpers. The Schneiders taught them how to avoid leaving traces, how to respond if confronted, and how to blend into the local environment. They were taught the local routines, the times when patrols passed, and the ways to remain invisible in plain sight. Even small tasks fetching water, collecting firewood, or using the barn's hidden cellar required precision and patience. The villagers instilled a sense of calm and confidence, not just for survival, but for preserving dignity amidst the danger. Meanwhile, the outside world continued its relentless march of chaos. Air raids, troop movements, and ration shortages meant the villagers themselves were under constant stress. They risked everything, knowing that a single denunciation or random inspection could shatter their plans. Yet, they persisted. Their motivation was simple but profound: compassion. They understood that in hiding these men, they were asserting a kind of moral defiance, a belief that even in the darkest times, there was a place for courage, kindness, and empathy. Stories of ingenuity and small victories began to emerge. On one occasion, a pair of German soldiers passed near the barn at night. The villagers remained calm, instructing the airmen to stay perfectly still, concealed beneath the hay. When one of the patrols paused, the villagers feigned normal activity, singing quietly and going about what appeared to be routine chores. The soldiers, convinced the barn was empty, moved on. Moments like these became small triumphs, reinforcing the trust between helpers and those they protected. The villagers also orchestrated escapes to safer areas, moving the airmen under cover of darkness. Using carts and horses, they carried men through fields and forest paths, avoiding main roads and checkpoints. They relied on local knowledge. Every hill, ditch, and hollow became part of the strategy. Occasionally, they hid men in abandoned buildings or haylofts, using natural camouflage to disguise any signs of occupation. Some of these hideouts were precarious, but the airmen learned that staying still, keeping calm, and trusting their guides were crucial for survival. Amid all this tension, there were moments of humanity that stood out. The airmen shared stories of home of families, towns, and ordinary life, bringing a fleeting warmth to the grim, war-torn surroundings. The villagers, in turn, shared what little they could: a loaf of bread, a warm blanket, a whispered joke. In the heart of danger, simple kindness became a lifeline. It was this human connection that gave both sides strength, that allowed them to navigate a world where fear could have easily overwhelmed courage. Perhaps most remarkable, was the quiet coordination of the broader network. Word had spread through the village and neighboring farms. Carefully, cautiously, only those who could be trusted became part of the operation. Every action was deliberate, every movement calculated. Even minor mistakes were addressed immediately, teaching lessons about vigilance and patience. The airmen learned to read their environment with new eyes, to see the subtle signs of danger, and to respond instinctively to the villagers' signals. The days stretched into weeks, each one filled with tension, small victories, and moments of quiet heroism. The villagers had transformed from ordinary citizens into guardians, each action weighed with the knowledge that failure meant death. The airmen, once isolated and vulnerable, were learning resilience, adaptability, and the extraordinary kindness of strangers in the most perilous circumstances. And yet, the ultimate challenge lay ahead. The forest could only conceal them for so long, and eventually, they would need a plan to escape entirely. The villagers understood that secrecy alone would not be enough. They would have to orchestrate something daring, precise, and nearly impossible. Every decision, every step, carried immense weight, and the margin for error was almost non-existent. The stage was being set for a climax that would test courage, trust, and the extraordinary lengths ordinary people could go to in the name of humanity. The night of the escape arrived with a tension that could almost be felt in the air. Every sound seemed amplified: the rustle of leaves, the distant barking of dogs, the low hum of a patrol truck in the distance. The villagers moved with deliberate calm, their faces pale but determined, knowing that one misstep could mean disaster. The airmen had prepared for this moment for weeks, practicing silent movement, memorizing the paths, and trusting the subtle signals from those who had sheltered them. There was no room for error, no margin for hesitation. Under the cover of darkness, they began their journey, slipping through hidden paths carved through the forest, avoiding well-trodden roads, and moving only when it was safe. Every step was a test of nerves, every shadow a potential threat. The villagers led the way, guiding the men with a combination of experience, intuition, and courage that had been honed in secrecy. Occasionally, the airmen would pause to catch their breath, their hearts pounding, knowing that soldiers could appear at any moment. Yet, each time they hesitated, a quiet gesture or whisper reminded them to continue, to trust in the people who had risked everything for them. At one point, a German patrol nearly stumbled upon the group. The villagers reacted instinctively, motioning the airmen to duck into a shallow hollow covered with branches and leaves. Time seemed to slow as the patrol passed, their boots crunching on the forest floor, their flashlights sweeping over the shadows. A single misstep would have been fatal. But the villagers' calm precision and the airmen's obedience allowed them to slip by unnoticed. Moments like these were tense, almost unbearable, yet they strengthened the bond between those hiding and those being hidden, forging a trust that transcended fear. Finally, they reached the edge of the forest, where a small, secluded road offered a way out. There, a wagon awaited, hidden beneath tarps and guided by another brave villager who had remained vigilant for weeks. One by one, the airmen climbed aboard, hearts still racing but spirits buoyed by the thought of safety. The villagers had orchestrated the journey with a level of care and precision that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. Every mile traveled brought them closer to freedom and further from the prying eyes of soldiers who would have shown them no mercy. The escape route took them to a remote safe house, several miles from the crash site. Here, for the first time in weeks, the airmen could relax, even if only briefly. They were fed, given clean clothing, and allowed a few hours of rest. The villagers, exhausted themselves, remained vigilant, their minds always alert to the possibility of discovery. They had accomplished something extraordinary, risking their own lives to ensure that strangers could survive in the heart of enemy territory. And as dawn broke, casting pale light over the hills, a quiet sense of triumph settled over both the villagers and the airmen. It would take days, careful planning, and the help of a broader network before the airmen could reach Allied lines. But that night, they had crossed a threshold from immediate danger to a fragile sense of security, and the significance of what had happened would not be lost on anyone involved. These were ordinary people, living under extraordinary circumstances, who chose courage over fear, compassion over ideology, and humanity over obedience to a regime that demanded cruelty. Looking back, the story resonates because it is not about the machinery of war, the strategies, or the battles. It is about people, the quiet bravery of civilians who understood what was at stake, the airmen who relied on strangers' courage, and the fleeting moments when morality and decency shone through the darkness of conflict. Each detail, the hidden paths, the whispered signals, the careful planning, and the small acts of kindness, builds a picture of what courage truly looks like when it is tested under impossible circumstances. In the years that followed, the story of the B-29 and the villagers who hid it became a testament to human resilience. For the airmen, it was a tale they would carry forever, a reminder that even in the most dangerous and uncertain times, there are people willing to risk everything to do what is right. For the villagers, it was a quiet pride, a knowledge that they had made a difference, that they had chosen life, hope, and humanity when it could have been easier to look away. This story challenges our assumptions about the enemy, about ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, and about the power of compassion in the darkest of times. It reminds us that even amidst destruction, fear, and the machinery of war, courage and humanity can prevail. And perhaps, above all, it serves as a timeless lesson that the choices we make, even when no one is watching, can change lives, save souls, and leave a legacy far greater than ourselves. The B-29 crew eventually returned home, alive thanks to strangers who had never asked for recognition, whose bravery was silent but profound. And long after the guns fell silent, the tale of the villagers who hid a crashed bomber and helped its crew escape stood as a quiet, enduring beacon, a story of risk, trust, and the enduring power of humanity in a world torn apart by war.